Hey, welcome. This is Lee Waller. I am in Cinema 4D Lite, the Lite version of Cinema 4D, and I'm going to take a look at animating, setting keyframes, and animating in Cinema 4D. First, we're going to take a look at our timeline area right down here at the bottom. This is a basic timeline, and you'll see that right now this timeline is set up from 0 to 90 frames. We can increase that amount of time that we want to animate with by coming down here and typing in. So this project is set up at 30 frames per second, so we can do the math by that. So if we want a 5-second timeline, we can 5 by 30 is 150. So we can increase the amount of time simply by adjusting this number here. You'll also see down here that the view that we have of the timeline can be adjusted by this bar right here. So if I want to see a smaller area of the timeline, I can use this bar to decrease the amount that we're viewing in our timeline. And I can also slide through the entire timeline using this. We have our transfer controls here to play and to jump from one frame backwards or a frame forward. And then we can also jump between keyframes as we have set them, either to keyframe previous or to the next keyframe. And then here we can jump to the front end of the timeline or to the back end of the timeline. To set keyframes, any object or property that you want to set keyframes on will need to be selected. And you'll see here that I have the cube selected. I have it selected in the Objects tab here. And down in the Attributes panel, you'll see that I have my coordinates properties here. And next to any property that can be animated, you'll find this diamond here. And that is where we will set keyframes. So for this first animation, I'm just going to slide this cube over to the left side and set a keyframe for the X axis right there. You'll see that where my timeline indicator is right there at 0, we have now set a keyframe. And so I can move forward, and if I want this animation to take 2 seconds, I can drop that at 60 frames, and I can either scrub that on the x-axis or I can scrub here on the x-axis to adjust that. You'll notice now that the diamond is no longer fully red, but it just has this simple burnt orange outline. That's indicating that this property has been animated, but that we need to set the new keyframe. And so I will click on it, and that sets the second keyframe. So I have those two keyframes in the timeline. I can jump back to the beginning, hit the play button, and watch that animation. Now I'll animate a second property on this. I'll go back to the beginning of the timeline. I'm going to animate the rotation, and I'm going to animate the rotation on the pitch. You'll notice that rotation is indicated by HPB, which is heading, pitch, and bank. If you want to change the order of that or change that from HPB to X, Y, and Z, just click on this drop-down menu and change that there. That might make a little more sense. I'm going to set this back to 0, and I will click the keyframe there to start that keyframe at 0, and then I'll jump to 60 frames in and rotate that. Oh, let's go full 360 on that. And then I'll set that keyframe again. So those two keyframes have been set. Jump back to the beginning of the timeline and watch that through. Now the motion on these keyframes are easing in and out of their positions. So it starts off smooth, increases speed, and then as it comes to the stop, it begins to ease into that stop. So they're not hard starts and stops. If you want to change that easing, then what you'll need to do is select that keyframe right there. You see it highlighted in that yellow. And now over here in our attributes panel, you'll see that the key properties interpolation there is spline. We can change that to linear. And then we can jump to our last keyframe, take a look at it. It is also set to spline. We can change that to linear and then jump back and play that through and you'll see that it is constant motion from beginning to end. If you want to change that back, you can select those keyframes, set it back to spline, and we can jump back and play that through. And that motion is easing in and out again. In this example, I have two properties that are animated, but I'm only seeing a keyframe that is representing both of them. To be able to separately adjust the position and the rotation for both of those values, I can come down here to the timeline and you'll see this icon right here, and we hover over it and it says Timeline Dope Sheet. We click on that and it'll bring up this timeline right here. I'm going to grab the bottom of the viewer, bring it up so we can see a little bit more of it. And now you'll see that I have in this timeline the cube represented. I can open that up and you'll see now that I have settings for position and rotation. So if I want to jump in and adjust these separately, I can. So if I want the timing to change on these, so if I want the rotation to start after the cube begins to move, I can come in here to rotation and grab that keyframe and drag it to wherever I want it, and on the end also if I want to do that. And now when we play through that, you'll see that reflected in the animation. So any property that we animate on an object can also be individually adjusted in this timeline dope sheet. I'm going to close the dope sheet out. I'm going to add in one more object and animate it very quickly. I'll just grab this sphere, drop it right there. Again, with the sphere selected there, I have my coordinates here. I'm going to scrub through and make sure that my timeline indicator is where I want to start this animation, maybe about right there. And I will set my first keyframe for Z-axis right there. There's my keyframe, and then I'll come through and maybe give it a little more time and adjust that sphere to pass by. And again, click the diamond there to set that keyframe. Now I can jump back to the beginning and take a look at my animation. And I'll open up the dope sheet, and now you'll see that the sphere is represented in there also, along with the position property there. So if I decide that I want to move the animation, I can, with all of these selected, grab this bar up top and slide this to wherever I want the animation to occur. And let's take a look at that. I'm going to close out the dope sheet, and now what I'm going to do is add in a camera to our scene. And right there on our camera icon, you can see that we have a camera, a target camera, and a stereo camera. Clicking on the icon is just going to load the basic camera, and that's what we need for this animation. Now, at this moment, the camera is in the scene, but we are not viewing from the camera. To activate this camera right here, we need to click this icon, camera object, right there, and now we are actively seeing through the camera. I'm going to click that off just to show you what's going on. And so I will animate out. And so there's the camera. We'll move around a little bit. You can see the camera. You can see my scene that I've set up with these two objects. And there's the camera. Now, when I go back to my camera and I click it on, I activate it. Now we are again seeing from the view of the camera. This is helpful if you need to jump out of your camera, make some adjustments, or see what's going on in your scene and then come back to it. So for this animation, I'm going to bring the timeline indicator back to the beginning of the timeline, and I'm going to set keyframes for the 6 properties here that represent position and rotation. And then I will play through the full animation, and then I will adjust my camera. Like that, and you'll see that 5 out of the 6 have been adjusted. So I'm going to go in and set keyframes for all of them. And so now I should have that animation. We'll jump back to the beginning and watch that play through. Take a look at the dope sheet and you will see there that we do have our camera added into there, and jump in it into those properties, and there's our keyframes for our position and rotation. And so we can go in and adjust those, change those however we need to. I hope this has been helpful. For more on motion media design, check out my other tutorials.